Hello. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. I'm Rosina Snow. I'm the Director of Communications at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. And today I'm so excited that we're joined by Gabi Kinney of Wetlands Watch. I'll give her a fuller introduction in a moment. Before we start today, I'd like to do a brief land acknowledgement. We do gather on the unceded land of the Indigenous peoples. I am in Charlottesville, which is Monacan land. And if you are unsure whose land you are on, you can visit nativeland.ca and find out. If you don't know, it's definitely worthwhile to check that out. So this episode focuses on RGGI, which is short for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. If you haven't heard of it, RGGI is a program that Virginia has been in since 2021, I believe, that requires polluters to pay for their emissions and then disperses the money raised from that. And it effectively drives down pollution and creates hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. There is some controversy right now about whether Virginia is legally still in RGGI, which we will get into in a bit. But today we want to make sure Virginians know more about where this funding goes and how important it is. So that's why we invited Gabi Kinney to join us. And she's going to talk about one of the two major things that RGGI funds, which is flooding preparedness. Gabi Kinney is the Community Engagement Project Manager at Wetlands Watch, which is an environmental nonprofit based in Norfolk, Virginia, focused on advocacy, adaptation strategies, policy, and outreach for planning for flood risk and the impacts of climate-driven sea level rise. Gabi co-leads Wetland Watch's engagement with local governments and regional planning entities on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, CFPF for short, so you might hear that, CFPF, working internally and with conservation partners to develop and share resources on critical resilience funds. Through her role, Gabi is also helping Wetlands Watch expand flood risk advocacy initiatives, including outreach on the CFPF to non-coastal and riverine regions statewide. That's a cool word, riverine. Mm-hmm. Write that down, creative writers. So to begin our conversation, Gabi, would you tell me about Wetlands Watch and the work that you do?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. You gave a great intro for me already, but my name is Gabi Kinney. I'm the Community Engagement Project Manager at Wetlands Watch, and I'm also a certified floodplain manager. So my role as it relates to flood risk involves doing community outreach to local governments on the state-administered Community Flood Preparedness Fund, or CFPF, which we'll talk about a lot later. And I also lead, kind of as a side project for myself, and a shameless plug, is our community science flood mapping program, Catch the King, which invites volunteers from across the state to participate in an annual flood data collection event during the king tide season in the fall. So all sorts of fun flood risk explorations in my role. Wetlands Watch is a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to work where land communities and water meet to conserve nature in a changing climate. Our organization conducts extensive public outreach across the Commonwealth and has traditionally concentrated on the tidal regions where sea level rise is disturbing the coastal ecosystem and the survivability of wetlands. We consult with local governments through this work and help them make informed adaptation planning and implementation decisions. We also provide support and information to Virginia state agencies and members of the General Assembly, all together seeking to kind of address the impacts of sea level rise and recurrent flooding at the local and state level. As part of our outreach work, we assist communities in adaptation designs to help them address flooding from increased rainfall intensity and sea level rise. And that all includes outreach on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund.
Wow, that sounds like really important work, and that covers a lot. Thanks for sharing. Would you please give our listeners an overview of RGGI? and the current status of Virginia's participation in it.
Yes. So Virginia joined RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, under legislation sponsored by the Northam administration in 2020. And this required the state to participate in a regional, multi-state cap and invest program targeted at reducing CO2 emissions over time while generating revenues for the state through quarterly carbon allowance auctions. So as a participant in the RGGI program, states are participants in quarterly auctions where proceeds, the states get to decide what they do with the proceeds that come from the RGGI auctions. So this program has proven to work well in reducing emissions over time for the states enrolled in RGGI, and it puts energy companies on the hook for the pollution that they've caused in their communities. So through its participation in RGGI, Virginia set up auction proceeds to actually be invested back into the communities through funding programs administered by state agencies. So the proceeds that Virginia receives from these allowances generated funding in two critical programs. 45% of the proceeds during these auctions goes to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which is administered by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And then 50% goes towards low-income energy efficiency, administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. The remaining 5%, if you're wondering what that is, it's more just kind of an administrative set aside for Virginia to manage its participation in RGGI. So Virginia's RGGI participation has generated nearly $379 million from the CFPF since 2021 to 2023. So you were correct. 2021 was our first year of enrollment in the program. In 2023, DEQ formalized a regulatory withdrawal that took effect upon the expiration of Virginia's contract with RGGI at the end of 2023. So when we enrolled in 2021, we had a 3-year, or it was 2020 technically that the legislation went in. So we had a 3-year contract, and that expired at the end of 2023. Our partners at the Southern Environmental Law Center, or SELC, is leading this lawsuit to actually fight what we believe is an illegal repeal of RGGI and Virginia's participation in it. So now that Virginia no longer—
just to be clear, sorry, that it was repealed by a board. I think it was the Air and Pollution Board, right?
Yes. So
but the legislature did not take us out.
Correct. So this is a regulatory—
take us out. The argument is, you know, the legislature would need to do that. They did not do that.
Exactly. So they're attempting a regulatory or administrative repeal through the Air Pollution Control Board, which we stand by is an illegal repeal. It would have to be repealed through legislation for Virginia to leave RGGI, since the initial legislation that went in is what enrolled us in RGGI in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
So now that Virginia no longer receives RGGI auction proceeds, so again, our contract ended in December of 2023, so we are not going to participate in the first quarterly auction as of right now, as it stands. No additional funding is coming into those critical funding programs. And again, my kind of realm of expertise is the CFPF. And that will be without action by the General Assembly or administration through the budget process. So the only other way for the CFPF to gain money would be some required action by the General Assembly and approving through budget.
So was it 45% or 50% that's for flooding?
45 for community.
45. So just for the audience, Gabi shared that it was 397 million.
79, yeah, 379.
Flooding preparedness. So also keep in mind that there's an additional over 400 million that has also gone to energy efficiency, which is the other thing that RGGI funds. So that is a lot of money.
Yeah, and a very critical
thing we're not going to be generating for these very important things.
Yes, absolutely. Very critical funds. And the programs are fairly complementary. So the CFPF, and we'll talk about it later too, is kind of a way for local governments to start thinking about resilience planning and flood preparedness. And the Energy Efficiency Fund is actually providing money directly to communities and homes to weatherize and protect against flooding. So they're very complementary, and other like air quality and things like that as well. So yeah, really critical complementary programs for the state.
Yeah. So now there's this legal contention about whether we're in or not in RGGI, but unfortunately we're going to miss the first auction, which is how the pollution, basically the costs need to be paid for the pollution that's been happening, and then
Correct.
that the money's generated, and then we can get access to. So we're going to miss that first auction, which is no good. But in the legislature, there have been some moves made to try and ensure and clarify that we are in and will stay in RGGI. So would you talk about that?
Yeah, so RGGI in the budget, luckily the General Assembly included several provisions relating to RGGI and its funding programs in the most recent budget, draft budget. So first they included language that would require DEQ to create a new contract to get Virginia back into RGGI. The governor may choose to try to veto this, and that's kind of the stage that we're at. This budget has kind of reached Governor Youngkin's desk, and it is up to him whether or not he approves or vetoes what's within the budget. And there are questions regarding if he's legally able to veto this section of the budget that requires that a new contract is written, because there's no specific funding attached to that budget provision. So because there's no kind of approval of a funding amount, this is more of a narrative budget amendment. So there's questions as to whether he's legally able to do that. And unfortunately, I am not the policy expert, and I can't go into too much more detail on how that all kind of functions behind the scenes. But if anybody who's listening has questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll point you in the right direction. And second, the legislators maintained that the governor recently put out a press release of $500 million of investment towards conservation initiatives in the state, and $100 million of that appropriation would go towards would come from general funds and go towards the CFPF. If the governor signs this, it will be an important gap funding to ensure that the critical program can continue even as our participation in RGGI is decided in the courts with the ongoing lawsuit and the budget process. So this is kind of a way for us to navigate the Virginia's lack of the contract with RGGI and to continue funds coming into the CFPF. But ultimately, there needs to be more work done to ensure that funding continues to go in year after year and that it's at the right amount. So like I said,
there's a big difference between 100 million and 400 million.
Right. Huge difference. And that's over 3 years. So if you do the math, it's definitely more than 100 million each year that comes into the CFPF, which shifts and ebbs and flows based on the auctions. So you don't get the same amount of auction money each year. But it's also really critical to note that the last auction that we participated in the fourth quarter of 2023 was the most amount of money that we had received from RGGI auctions, period. So really critical.
Yeah. And so can you talk a little bit about why we need this funding? With flooding preparedness being one of the two main areas where the money goes to, why was that chosen as one of those areas? And why is it so important in Virginia?
Absolutely. So Virginians are experiencing climate change firsthand. We all kind of have known about it by now, from rising seas along our coastlines, flash floods in our mountains, more powerful storms statewide. We're seeing lots and lots of water come into our communities due to climate change. Southeast Virginia has the highest rate of sea level rise on the East Coast, and you may hear Norfolk, Virginia as one of those kind of primary statistics that come out.
Even more than Florida.
Yes, even more than Florida. I believe we are second only to New Orleans in terms of adaptation and the costs of adaptation. But Norfolk, Virginia has the highest rate of sea level rise on the eastern coast of the United States. Yeah. So really, really kind of terrifying statistic. And then we're seeing, in addition to kind of tidal increases, we're also seeing an increase of 20% of precipitation statewide. So we're seeing more rainfall as well. And so our riverine communities and non-coastal communities are seeing significant increases in flash floods and seeing more of those hurricanes roll through their region as opposed to the coastal region and these nor'easters. Sea level rise and more frequent storms impact our homes, businesses, how we get to school, work, and our faith institutions and the broader economy. Flooding doesn't really care who you vote for. It impacts all of us. So this is really not a partisan issue. And research from the National Institute of Building Sciences has shown that for every $1 invested in pre-disaster hazard mitigation, $6 is saved. So This highlights the importance of investing in planning for disasters or preparedness, and flood preparedness is kind of the core of the CFPF, in addition to assuring, of course, that post-disaster funding and resources are also available. So we're trying to step into a space that allows communities to prepare for these events and to start thinking about what resilience planning looks in their communities. And you truly can't have one without the other. You need the pre-disaster kind of planning effort and the post-disaster resources to help communities kind of get through these storms and the disasters that they experience.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, when you're saying that rainfall is increasing, many of us have also noticed that there have been more droughts. So like, for instance, in the summer and fall, it didn't rain very much. There were wildfires. So the fact that overall rainfall is increasing means that when it happens, it's happening in a very short period of time. I remember even in Charlottesville, where I live, seeing there was some, very heavy rain, and within like 10 minutes of it, I was seeing the water coming back up out of the drains, because I guess they were full, like they could take more water.
Yes, yeah.
And Charlottesville isn't even. I've also been to Norfolk, and there had been a big squall, a big rainstorm, and it was flooded, like it was underwater. And then talking to local folks, they're like, oh yeah, this happens every time it rains.
Yeah.
And like, you had to wait 30 minutes for it to be low enough for you to be able to continue to drive.
Yeah, it's really scary
living with this already.
Yeah, and it's even more scary in some ways, and not more scary comparatively, but when you think about things like sunny day flooding, where the streets are flooded, but there's not a cloud in the sky on the coast, because the stormwater infrastructure is connected to the tidal areas and the outfalls where they kind of emerge out into the tributaries or straight out into the ocean. And that tidal influence is coming up through the storm drain infrastructure and actually flooding out cities from underneath, because those storm drains, like you said, you see it kind of bubble up straight from the storm drain. So you get these really just kind of doomsday looking scenarios. There are pictures of folks who go out in their kayaks because that's all the transportation they have to leave their house and go into the community. So the infrastructure is
to be Venice.
Literally, yeah.
We're not ready for that. Yeah. But this money is desperately needed. Yes. And frankly, we should have been spending this decades ago. And so we're catching up now.
Yeah, this planning, we're kind of in a catch-up planning phase right now, trying to get everybody kind of on the same page about resilience, and resilience looks different in communities across the Commonwealth. Like we were just saying, rainfall communities and riverine communities experience different impacts of flooding than coastal communities do. And so being able to share those resources equitably and focus attention on communities that have been less kind of involved in this work in the past, or who haven't had capacity to do this, like our rural communities, is really important. And DCR has actually been mandated to ensure that 25% of the awards given through the Community Flood Preparedness Fund are distributed to low-income geographic areas. And they have done so very well. I believe over or nearly 3/4 of the awards that have gone out across the state of Virginia in rounds 1 to 3. We're in round 4 right now and just waiting for the awards, but 1 through 3 have gone to those low-income geographic areas. So really providing just critical resources to folks who really need it.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can get this on here, but there's a graphic that kind of shows where the flooding money has gone to different regions. Oh, and yes. If I can get it up here, I will. But I mean, it's not even a lot of it is going to coastal areas that need a lot. But like even where I live in Central Virginia, we've received over $16 million. And Southwest has received over $3 million, and those funds are needed as well. So,
yeah, the visualization is and I'm interested if it's the one that Wetlands Watch created. It's a really good graphic to see that skew of distribution to the coastal areas, because a lot of coastal localities have the capacity and kind of the pre-existing engagement in resilience planning and comprehensive planning and hazard mitigation planning related to flooding. And part of Wetlands Watch's mission in this space and through our Community Flood Preparedness Fund outreach is to really provide these resources to communities inland and in southwestern Virginia. So we have a huge initiative going on right now, and part of what my role when I started, oh, there it is, perfect. This is the Wetlands Watch graphic.
Okay. Well, it's great. It really, yeah.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you could show it on the screen. So yeah, our goal is to really make sure that these CFPF funds are reaching local governments in those riverine and inland non-coastal communities, because many folks out there don't know that the CFPF exists. And so we provide the technical assistance with those communities to show them what the fund does, how we can help them start their resilience planning work, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the CFPF? Like what is an example of a project that this funds, and why are these sorts of projects important? Why are they effective?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CFPF is the only funding program in the state that explicitly provides resources for capacity building, staff training, and planning related to flood resilience. And this enables kind of the development of larger and more comprehensive projects, which can then be eligible for broader programs like federal funding opportunities. Overall, we're noticing that communities are starting with the planning and capacity building categories. So the CFPF is built out threefold. There's a planning and capacity building category, a studies category, and a projects category. And we're noticing that most folks are, again, starting out with that resilience planning category because they have to define what flood resilience looks like for their community and actually engage the residents and stakeholders of that community in what and how floods are affecting them. So the interesting component of the CFPF is that it's kind of meant to be a stepwise process. So communities come in and develop a resilience plan through that planning and capacity building category with the CFPF. And in order to access the project implementation grant funding, they have to have an approved resilience plan on file with DCR. So again, because this flooding is so kind of ubiquitous across the state, getting communities up to speed on creating resilience plans so that they can then produce informed projects and implement informed projects is really important. So we're seeing a lot of folks going after the planning and capacity, especially those rural, non-coastal, southwestern Virginia communities who are just really starting the implementation work for this or the planning work for this. Localities have to ask, what does resilience look like in my community? What are our biggest risks? Where are our communities most vulnerable to flooding? And how can we mitigate it with the priorities of the community and values in mind? There's been several projects, and just moving into the project category, there's been several projects aimed at studying watersheds and floodplains to update FEMA's flood insurance rate maps. And those describe a kind of a zoned flood risk based on the community's proximity to flood-prone water sources. Additionally, several projects that fund nature-based approaches. So there's this broader emphasis for the CFPF to direct localities to implement nature-based solutions in their communities. And those are some things like property acquisition and then restoration of the site to open space, installation of nature-based solutions like living shorelines or creek restoration. And then there are other projects that improve the capacity of stormwater infrastructure and even community engagement. There's a program on the Middle Peninsula called Fight the Flood. And this is a way for the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission to help communities in that region access resources to kind of defend their property and implement the right solutions that help mitigate stormwater. This program too, and I thought this would be something good to add because of where you work, Rosina, is it can be relevant to faith communities as well, because the CFPF can actually fund establishment of resilience hubs. And these are spaces where communities can meet and discuss resilience priorities. And then if a house or a house of worship or faith leadership is interested in kind of being that resilience hub where communities can come out and kind of talk about these issues, they can actually work with their local government or their regional planning entity to discuss an application to the CFPF.
Wow. I'd love for you to send me some more info on that.
Will do. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds amazing. So this is a ton of stuff. And it all just sounds so necessary. So it's upsetting to think about the funding for these projects to either disappear or be much less than what it would be with RGGI. Like, what would be the implications if this funding were to disappear?
Yeah, so ultimately, without RGGI auction proceeds bringing in steady funding for the state, so again, those quarterly auctions were things that we could anticipate and expect getting proceeds from, and those do exceed $130 million annually in 2022 and 2023. So when we were talking about $100 million in the budget provision, there is more than that coming into the CFPF through RGGI. The CFPF will then be very quickly unable to meet the needs and demands of Virginia localities who are desperately seeking the reliable funding for flood mitigation planning and projects, unless the state appropriators fill the gap. So unless we can set up a consistent funding source within the state for the CFPF, these resources unfortunately will eventually deplete.
It just makes total sense for it to come from the cost of pollution, because pollution is costly and the polluter should be paying for it. Like, it's otherwise the costs are being externalized onto us, so it encourages them to stop polluting because it will cost them money. And it's just fair and makes sense that pollution, which costs the population a lot in terms of the negative health impacts, that in all sorts of, and insurance and all sorts of things. There should be a cost to that. It makes total sense. And the money from that absolutely should go to solving the problems that the pollution is causing in the first place. This just makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really kind of adds a line of hope that the state, and like I said, states who enroll in RGGI get to decide what they do and how they kind of invest the money that comes in from the RGGI proceeds. And Virginia dedicated those funds to going back to the communities. And I think it's just such a full circle way to handle carbon emissions and pollution with a direct benefit to the communities that this money is reaching. So it's truly a program we don't want to see disappear. It will leave a lot of localities kind of with less resources to address this resilience planning work. And the CFPF is designed to be kind of an easier and more simplistic way to access resilience resources, as opposed to something like a federal grant, because localities that don't have the capacity or the grant writing staff to approach these funding programs, these really big kind of emergency management programs, the CFPF is just a low barrier, kind of really simplistic application and in getting those resources. So without it, it's just going to make resilience planning quite a bit more difficult.
Yeah. So ideally, we don't know what's going to happen with the lawsuit. As far as actions that residents of Virginia can take at this point, ideally, the governor just doesn't remove it or change what's in the budget now. So, what actions can we take and avoid then another potential legal fight about whether he's even allowed to do that? So how can, he be encouraged or prevailed upon, do you think? What sort of actions can we take to share how important this is to the community, how much of a priority it is, how much people are paying attention, and really want this budget to stay how it is? Just let's do it. The legislators passed. Let's make sure that we stay in RGGI, and that these hundreds of millions of dollars for incredibly necessary and effective measures continue to be dispersed.
Yeah, so there are a couple different ways you can get kind of directly your voice heard. You can actually reach out directly to Governor Youngkin's office and call and say that you support Virginia getting back into RGGI. You can also contact your local legislators, the ones, many are sponsoring this legislation, and those in your communities who who you can call their offices as well and let them know why RGGI is important to you or your community at large. If you've personally been affected by flooding or flood risk, really those stories can go a long way. And the way that it impacts you, your communities, and the benefits that it provides. And you can look into the Community Flood Preparedness Awards that have gone into your community in the past. And we have resources available. The Virginia Conservation Network has a really awesome interactive map that shows all of the awards that have gone out in rounds 1 through 3. So you can kind of navigate that and see what sorts of resilience projects and planning has gone out. So you can kind of use that while you're talking with legislators. And then, of course, just advocating for broader flood resilience in your community and why it's important to you. If again, you're personally impacted by flood resilience, or you know that this is a critical value in your area, doing something like engaging with some of the local leaders in your community, or the civic groups, or the faith communities, or things like that, that could kind of help advance work on resilience planning. And getting that message sent to the legislators and Governor Youngkin's office. That's really the most that we can do right now. And then just in general, just knowing your flood risk, just look into where you are in relation to your flooding area. That's always a good
yeah, those are all fantastic suggestions. And in general, I've encouraged folks to just be in the habit of calling your legislators, put their number in your phone so you could just call them up. You just say, it can take 5 seconds. Just say, they'll write it down, and I'll also mention that we're going to be at Virginia IPL. We're going to be hosting a RGGI letter writing workshop to encourage folks to do letters to the editors where they are, especially from a faith-based, I think, perspective is going to be important to get that groundswell of energy and keep it noisy, keep the attention on it, and make sure that it doesn't feel like this issue is fading. This is the link, but I also just put it in the comments.
That's a great workshop. That's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be fun because we'll all work on our letters together and give some talking points, some pointers. So it'll be a community effort. Good. And we hope to even that will make such a big difference, but also everything that you mentioned as well. Those resources are all fantastic. And how can people support Wetlands Watch and support your work?
Yeah, so feel free to engage with us anytime. Our website is wetlandswatch.org. We have a whole tracking page. If you Googled Wetlands Watch next to Community Flood Preparedness Fund, you will see we have a really awesome Community Flood Preparedness Fund tracking page. We have a RGGI tracking page as well that has a really awesome timeline graphic all the way back to when the initial notice of intended regulatory action was submitted by the Air Pollution Control Board. Everything. We have tons of resources, talking points, kind of updates on how the CFPF has gone out into communities. Those are great websites to engage with. And then if you have any questions at all, or want to know how kind of the Virginia Conservation Network more broadly is working in this space, we have kind of all sorts of folks from different areas of expertise working on this issue and flood resilience more broadly across the state. So feel free to reach out to me personally anytime. I don't know if we can drop my email in there, but I'm sure we can we can do that somewhere. It's just Gabi.Kinney@wetlandswatch.org. And my email's on the website somewhere. So feel free to reach out to me anytime if you've got questions or would like to get connected with someone involved in the space. But other than that, I really appreciate you having invited me and letting me have the platform to talk about RGGI and why it's important.
That was really informative. There's probably a lot of people who haven't heard about RGGI at all, or if they do, they don't really know what it does. I think we hopefully can take people from going from zero understanding to at least knowing how much money is going into funding these necessary projects, and that will disappear if we don't continue doing this extremely common sense program.
Absolutely.
So thank you for your work. And I hope everyone will have a beautiful weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, and next not next week, but in April, we're going to do a part 2 of this conversation to talk about the energy efficiency side. So I hope folks will join for that conversation as well.
Great.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.